I lost my job, my reputation, and my friends in a single day. And all because of the one person I trusted the most. You never think it'll be you. You hear stories. Someone gets fired unjustly, blacklisted, left with nothing but a severance check and unanswered emails. You might even shake your head and feel sorry for them. But deep down, you tell yourself, that won't happen to me. I used to believe that too. My name is Emma Lawson. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 6 years, I was the Director of Human Resources at Harrington and Rowe, a prestigious law firm based in Manhattan. You'd recognize the name if you follow major corporate lawsuits or the occasional white-collar scandal on the evening news. We represented the untouchables, the ones who always won. And in a way, I had won too. I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I was respected, well-paid, and even liked. Something rare in HR. I built real relationships with the staff. I remembered birthdays. I advocated for better maternity leave, helped implement wellness programs, and quietly intervened when junior associates were being run into the ground. People knew I cared. That wasn't just my job. It was who I was. But none of those things saved me when it all came crashing down. At the center of my professional world stood Anna Whitmore, the CEO of Harrington and Rowe. She was brilliant, charismatic, sharp as hell, and intimidating. But somehow we clicked. She once told me I was her mirror, the only person who wasn't afraid to push back or call her out. I admired her. I trusted her. She gave me my first real chance and told me I had a seat at the table. Looking back, I wonder how much of that was real, and how much was just strategy. The beginning of the end started quietly. A paralegal named Jordan stopped me in the break room one Monday morning and said something strange. "Hey, Emma, do you know if they're supposed to be docking our bonuses for sick days? I thought we were protected under the updated contract." I frowned. That didn't sound right. Bonuses were performance-based, not attendance-based, especially not for non-salaried employees. I told Jordan I'd look into it, expecting it to be a simple miscommunication. But when I dug into the payroll records, things got murky. Too murky. I found a pattern. Unexplained deductions, retroactive policy changes not approved by legal, and in some cases, no written documentation at all. A few days later, I spoke with another employee who had been let go after submitting a formal harassment complaint. Her severance was conditional on signing an NDA, and she wasn't allowed to speak to anyone internally. It was all very clean. Too clean. I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. Maybe it was just bad communication. Maybe someone in finance was taking shortcuts. I scheduled a meeting with Anna. She seemed distracted, flipping through emails as I explained what I had found. "Emma," she said finally, "this isn't something to get worked up over. We're going through restructuring. Some things are bound to get missed." "But this isn't just a mistake," I said, my voice tightening. "These are people's wages. People are being punished for getting sick. Or worse, retaliated against." She gave me a tired smile, the kind she used when she wanted to shut down a conversation without outright saying it. "You're overreacting. And frankly, I need you to be focused on retention strategies right now, not this." I walked out of her office that day with something cold settling in my stomach. That week, I started getting CC'd on fewer emails. A strategy meeting was rescheduled without me. Twice. My assistant Molly, who used to bring me coffee every morning with a smile, suddenly seemed wary. I caught her whispering to someone and glancing toward my office. I told myself I was imagining things. Then came the performance review. I had never had a negative evaluation in my life. But this one was different. The feedback was vague. Lack of alignment with leadership goals. Unnecessary escalation of internal matters. Difficulty collaborating with senior management. I read it 3 times, feeling my pulse in my ears. None of it made sense. I requested a follow-up. I never got a response. Still, I tried to play by the rules. I documented everything. I sent polite, detailed emails outlining my concerns. I followed the internal grievance process by the book, but every step I took felt like walking deeper into a trap. The day it happened was a Friday. I remember because I wore my favorite navy blue blazer, the one that made me feel powerful. I had a lunch meeting scheduled with a diversity consultant and a 3 p.m. check-in with my team. Instead, I was summoned to Anna's office at 10:07 a.m. She didn't even look me in the eye. "Emma, this isn't easy, but after careful consideration, we've decided to part ways. Effective immediately." My heart dropped. "On what grounds?" She pushed a manila envelope across the desk. "We believe this is the best course of action for everyone involved. Your severance package is generous, and we'd appreciate your discretion." "Wait, what?" "Anna, you can't—" Her voice cut like a blade. "It's done, Emma. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." 17 minutes later, I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box. My phone buzzed constantly, emails being deactivated, calendar events disappearing, Slack accounts suspended. The silence that followed was deafening. My so-called friends? Radio silence. My inbox? Empty. By that evening, I was already being whispered about in legal circles. She caused trouble. She couldn't handle pressure. She broke trust with the firm. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter. Not yet. I sat in my car outside the building, staring at the glass doors of the law firm. Everything felt surreal, like I was in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. A mere hour ago, I was part of the firm's leadership, trusted by colleagues, respected by my peers, and now I was an outcast, a whisper behind closed doors. Effective immediately. That was the phrase that echoed in my mind. The words felt like they belonged to someone else, not Anna, someone I had once considered a mentor and a friend. It wasn't supposed to go this way. It couldn't. I had only tried to do what was right. But that was the problem. When you're a part of something as big as Harrington and Rowe, doing the right thing sometimes means doing the wrong thing. I had exposed something illegal, something that could bring down the people who had the power to make or break careers. I had thought that my years of loyalty and service would count for something, that Anna would back me up. But she hadn't. Instead, she'd cut me off like an unwanted appendage. I had found the evidence. It wasn't just an isolated incident. It was systematic. People were being fired for the simplest of reasons, harassed for speaking up, and worst of all, their bonuses were being docked under false pretenses. I wasn't overreacting. It was all part of a pattern, a cover-up. I tried to warn Anna, to tell her that the firm was heading down a dark path, but instead of an ally, I got a cold, indifferent response. And when I raised the issue with higher management, my concerns were dismissed outright. In the days leading up to my firing, things had gotten worse. I had been excluded from meetings. My emails, once responded to within minutes, now went unanswered. My work performance, perfect for the last 6 years, was suddenly called into question. I had been on the receiving end of vague and unsubstantiated criticisms. Anna, who had once praised my ability to handle difficult situations, now looked at me like I was a problem to be disposed of. She no longer trusted me. She no longer believed in me. "Not your problem," she had told me, a weak excuse for her refusal to act when I confronted her with the evidence. I could still hear her dismissive tone, the look in her eyes. It wasn't just indifference. It was betrayal. She had known what was going on. She just didn't care. Or worse, she had been complicit in it all. The last time we spoke, I had tried one final plea. "Anna, this is serious. These people are being mistreated. No, abused. You have to do something." And she had said, "I don't need you to make this harder, Emma." Drop it. That was the turning point. I knew then that it wasn't just my career on the line. It was my morals. I couldn't be a part of something like this, not even for the paycheck. I told myself I'd keep fighting. I had to. But it wasn't long before the corporate machine came crashing down on me. And it was swift. The next morning, as I walked into the office, I could feel it. The cold stares, the whispers behind my back. I used to walk through those halls with confidence, with a sense of purpose. Now, I was a pariah. When the news spread about my firing, it didn't take long for the rumors to begin. My colleagues avoided me like I had a contagious disease. The once friendly banter in the break room became uncomfortable silences. I watched as people who I had once considered my friends averted their eyes, their backs stiff with tension when I passed by. And then there was Anna. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't even acknowledge I existed. The woman who had once confided in me, who had called me her right hand, now pretended I was invisible. I knew she had to have said something to the others, something to justify her decision to everyone, to herself. She had made me into the villain. She had painted me as the whistleblower, the troublemaker who didn't fit in, who didn't understand the big picture, the corporate games they were all playing. It wasn't just the social isolation that stung. It was everything else. I had given my all to that firm, and in return, they had taken it all from me in an instant. My severance package was generous, sure, but money couldn't replace the years of effort, the trust I had built with those people, the respect I had fought for every day. The phone calls and emails that I had once eagerly looked forward to now lay unanswered. Even my apartment lease was canceled due to the loss of income. Everything I had worked for, every bit of stability I had crumbled away, piece by piece. But the worst part was the silence, the sheer isolation that came with it. No one reached out. No one offered support. No, I'm sorry this happened to you messages. They all knew the truth, but no one had the courage to stand by me. They were too afraid of what would happen to them if they did, too afraid of the power that Anna held over them. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself sinking into a place I had never been before. It wasn't just the financial strain. It was the emotional toll, the questioning, the self-doubt. I was angry, so angry. I was angry at Anna, at the firm, at the system. But most of all, I was angry at myself. How had I not seen it coming? Why had I trusted Anna so blindly? And then the fear crept in. What would I do now? How would I recover from this? There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. I wanted to give up. I wanted to disappear and pretend none of this had ever happened. But then, in the quietest of moments, something inside me shifted. I realized something. I wasn't done. This wasn't the end for me. I still had a voice. I still had a choice, and that choice? It was time to fight back. The weeks after my firing blurred into a haze of anger and exhaustion. I barely left my apartment, surviving on takeout and the occasional call from my sister, who lived across the country and couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of what had happened. The job market was a wasteland. Every application I sent out either went unanswered or ended with a polite rejection. No one wanted to touch someone who had been let go from a firm like Harrington and Rowe, especially not with the rumors swirling around me. But the worst part wasn't the job hunt. It was the silence. The way my former colleagues, people I had considered friends, had vanished overnight. The way my phone, once buzzing with messages, now sat untouched for days. The way Anna had erased me so completely, as if our years of trust had never existed. I spent hours replaying that final conversation in my head. Effective immediately. 3 syllables that had unraveled my life. Then, one rainy Tuesday, I stumbled upon an article while scrolling through my phone. It was about a nonprofit called the Fair Work Initiative, a group that fought for employees' rights against corporate retaliation. The headline caught my eye. Whistleblower protection laws, what they don't want you to know. I clicked on it, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Hope. According to the article, my firing might not just be unfair, it might be illegal. If I had been terminated for raising concerns about workplace violations, I could be protected under whistleblower laws. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. All this time, I'd been blaming myself, thinking I'd overstepped, that I'd brought this on myself. But what if I hadn't? What if I'd been right all along? I reached out to the organization that same day. The woman who met me at their downtown office was named Rachel Carter. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd spent over a decade as a labor lawyer before shifting to advocacy work. "You're not the first person to walk through that door with a story like this," she said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. "But yours? It's textbook retaliation." I gripped the cup, the warmth seeping into my fingers. "So what do I do?" Rachel leaned forward. "You fight back." Over the next hour, she laid out a plan. First, we'd file a complaint with the Department of Labor. Then we'd gather evidence: emails, recordings, anything that proved my concerns were legitimate and that my firing was a direct response to speaking up. "But here's the thing," Rachel said. "This isn't just about you. It's about them. Companies like Harrington and Rowe rely on silence. They bank on people being too scared or too broken to fight. The moment you push back, you expose them." I thought about Anna's cold dismissal, the way she'd shut me down when I tried to warn her, the way she'd made me disappear. I'm not disappearing. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I dug through old emails, saved every thread where I'd raised concerns about payroll discrepancies or unfair dismissals. I found notes from meetings where Anna had brushed me off. Then the gold mine. A voicemail from a junior associate who'd been fired after reporting harassment. "They told me if I talked, they'd blacklist me," she'd said, her voice shaking. I'd saved it at the time, intending to follow up. Now it was evidence. But the most damning proof came from an unexpected source: Molly, my former assistant. She reached out one evening, her message brief and nervous. "I can't meet in person, but I have something you should see." Attached was an email chain between Anna and the head of legal. The subject line alone made my stomach drop. "Emma Lawson, termination strategy." The contents were worse. "We need to minimize fallout. Frame it as performance-based. Offer severance with an NDA. If she pushes back, remind her we have leverage. Her reputation in this industry is fragile." And then, Anna's reply: "Make it clean. I don't want this becoming a distraction." I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. This wasn't just about silencing me. It was about erasing me. With Rachel's guidance, I filed a wrongful termination lawsuit. But I didn't stop there. I started a blog. Anonymous at first, under the pseudonym The Silent Witness. The first post was titled, "How to Destroy a Woman in Corporate America, a Step-by-Step Guide." I wrote about everything. The subtle gaslighting when I raised concerns, the way my performance reviews had been rewritten to justify my firing, the isolation, the whispers, the way Anna had looked at me that final day, like I was nothing. The post went viral. Comments poured in from strangers with similar stories. "This happened to me too. They did the same thing at my company. Thank you for speaking up." Then the media picked it up. A journalist from the New York Times reached out, asking if I'd be willing to talk. On the record. I hesitated. Going public meant burning every bridge I had left in the industry. It meant admitting how thoroughly I'd been broken. But it also meant the truth would finally be heard. I said yes. The article dropped on a Monday morning. By noon, my phone was blowing up with messages, some supportive, some furious. Harrington and Rowe issued a generic statement. "We dispute these allegations and will vigorously defend our position." But the damage was done. Other employees started coming forward. A paralegal admitted he'd been pressured into lying about his hours. A former associate revealed she'd been sexually harassed and fired after reporting it. The hashtag # silence by Harrington began trending. And then, the call. "Emma," Rachel said, her voice tight with excitement. "They've opened an investigation. The Department of Labor is subpoenaing their records." I sank into my chair, my breath shaky. For the first time since that day in Anna's office, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. The lawsuit was just the beginning. The blog grew, morphing into a platform for others to share their stories. I appeared on podcasts, wrote op-eds, even testified before a state labor committee. But the most surreal moment came when I received an email from a woman named Claire, a senior HR manager at a rival firm. "I read your story," she wrote. "I'm dealing with the same thing. Can we talk?" I replied immediately, "Yes." Because that was the point. They wanted us isolated, ashamed, alone. But I wasn't alone anymore, and I was just getting started. The morning of the first court hearing, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of my blazer. Navy blue, the same one I'd worn the day Anna fired me. A small act of defiance. My reflection stared back at me. Older now, the shadows under my eyes a testament to months of sleepless nights. But there was something else there too. A quiet determination that hadn't existed before. Rachel met me outside the courthouse, her briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. "Ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "Let's finish this." The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows, their cameras clicking as I walked in. Harrington and Rowe's legal team sat across from us, their expressions carefully neutral. But it was the empty seat beside them that caught my attention. Anna's. She hadn't shown up. Of course not. The judge called the session to order, and Rachel stood, her voice steady as she outlined the case. Wrongful termination, retaliation, systemic violations of labor laws. Then came the evidence. First, the emails, the ones Molly had leaked. The judge's face darkened as Rachel read aloud Anna's words. "Pozbudźcie jej tylko. Nam nie potrzebny scandal." Get rid of her quietly. We don't need a scandal. A murmur rippled through the room. Next, the voicemails from former employees, stories of withheld bonuses, NDAs signed under duress, harassment swept under the rug. One woman broke down on the stand, describing how she'd been fired after reporting a senior partner for groping her at a company event. "HR told me it was my word against his," she said, her voice shaking. "Then they offered me 2 months' pay to disappear." The final blow came when Rachel played a recording of my last meeting with Anna. Her voice, cold and dismissive, filled the courtroom. "Drop it, Emma. This isn't your problem." I closed my eyes, remembering the way my stomach had twisted that day. Now, the room was dead silent. By the afternoon, the story was everywhere. The New York Times ran the headline, "Inside the Culture of Silence at Harrington and Rowe." CNN picked it up, then Forbes, then Bloomberg. The hashtag number sign silenced by Harrington exploded, with thousands sharing their own stories of corporate retaliation. And then, the floodgates opened. The Department of Labor launched a full investigation. 3 more employees filed lawsuits. The firm's biggest client, a Fortune 500 company, publicly severed ties, citing ethical concerns. Recruiters whispered that top talent was avoiding Harrington and Rowe like the plague. And Anna? She resigned. Not gracefully. Not with a press release praising her years of service. No. She slunk out in the middle of the night, her name scrubbed from the company website by morning. Rumor had it the board forced her out, furious at the damage she'd brought to the firm. I wondered if she'd fought it, if she'd stood in some mahogany-paneled room and pleaded her case the way I once had. I hoped it hurt. The settlement came 6 weeks later. A 7-figure sum, a public apology from the firm, and, most importantly, a clause mandating third-party oversight of their HR practices for the next 5 years. Rachel handed me the check with a grin. "Congratulations, you just bankrupted their hush money budget." But the money wasn't the point. The point was the email I got that night from a woman named Lila, a junior associate who'd stayed at Harrington and Rowe. "Because of you, they just reinstated our bonuses," she wrote. "Thank you." The point was the invitation to speak at the National Labor Rights Conference, where a room full of strangers gave me a standing ovation. The point was the blog, The Silent Witness, now a hub for whistleblowers. Its subscriber count soaring past 100,000. Messages poured in daily. How do I report my boss? Can they fire me for this? You gave me the courage to come forward. And the point was Anna's face, pale and drawn when we crossed paths outside the courthouse on the final day. She opened her mouth to apologize, to curse me. But I turned and walked away before she could speak. Some silences are louder than words. The media called it a David and Goliath story. Podcasts wanted interviews. TEDx reached out about a talk. A literary agent slid into my DMs, asking if I'd ever considered writing a book. It was surreal. A year ago, I'd been a ghost. Erased, unemployable, drowning in self-doubt. Now, I was the woman who'd taken down a giant. But the truth was messier. There were still nights I woke up sweating, Anna's voice in my head. "You're overreacting." Days I wondered if the target on my back would ever really fade. Moments I missed the life I'd had before. The easy camaraderie of the office, the illusion of safety. Then I'd open my laptop and see another message from someone like me. And I'd remember, this was never just about me. The last time I saw Harrington and Rowe in the news, it was a headline about their merger falling through. The article quoted an anonymous insider. "No one wants to touch us. We're toxic." I screenshotted and sent it to Rachel with a single word. Good. That night, I sat down to write a new blog post. The title, "What Happens After You Win?" I typed the first line. They told me I'd never work in this town again. They were wrong. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. The check from Harrington and Rowe arrived on a Tuesday. 7 figures, direct deposit, no fanfare. I stared at the bank notification on my phone, waiting for the rush of victory. Instead, I felt nothing. The money didn't undo the sleepless nights, didn't erase Anna's voice in my head, didn't rebuild the bridges I'd burned. But it did give me a choice. I rented an office in Boston the next month. Small, sunlit, with a view of the Charles River. The brass plaque on the door read, "Lawson Consulting, Workplace Justice Advocacy." Rachel flew up for the opening. She handed me a bottle of champagne and a stack of business cards from women who'd reached out after the trial. "You realize you've created a monster, right?" she said, nodding at the line of clients already waiting. Most were like me. Women who'd spoken up and been punished for it. A nurse fired for reporting unsafe staffing levels. A tech worker blacklisted after exposing pay disparities. A teacher pushed out for whistleblowing on harassment. I listened to their stories, took notes, and fought for them the way no one had fought for me. It wasn't just about lawsuits. It was about giving them what I'd needed most. Validation. "You're not crazy. This wasn't your fault." Boston was different from New York. Slower, quieter, less obsessed with prestige. I bought a brownstone in Back Bay, filled it with secondhand furniture and plants I couldn't keep alive. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. Then there was Daniel, the journalist who'd covered my case for The Atlantic. We'd kept in touch after the trial, his messages shifting from professional to personal. "Saw this coffee shop and thought of you. You'd hate this pretentious art exhibit." He visited in October under the pretense of interviewing me for a follow-up piece. We spent the weekend walking the Freedom Trail, arguing about politics, and eating cannoli in the North End. On Sunday night, as we stood on my porch, he kissed me, soft, hesitant, like he was afraid I'd break. I didn't. The nightmares didn't stop, though. Sometimes I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was back in Anna's office, hearing those words. Effective immediately. Daniel would pull me close, his voice rough with sleep. "You're safe. She's gone." But the fear lingered in quieter ways. I'd flinch at unexpected emails, panic when a client rescheduled. Once, I nearly had a meltdown in a Starbucks because the barista handed me a cup with Harrington misspelled on it. Progress wasn't linear. One evening, I found Daniel reading my old blog posts. "You're a hell of a writer," he said. "Ever thought of turning this into a book?" I laughed. "Who'd want to read 300 pages of my corporate trauma?" He turned the screen toward me. A tweet from a young HR assistant. "The Silent Witness blog saved my career. I wish there was more." That night, I started drafting chapter 1. The invitation to keynote the Women in Leadership Summit came with a caveat. Anna Whitmore will be in attendance. My first instinct was to decline. Then I thought of Lila, of Claire, of all the women who'd written to me saying, "Your story made me brave." I wore red, a color Anna had once called unprofessional, and took the stage to a standing ovation. My speech wasn't polished. It was raw, angry, hopeful. They fire us to scare the rest into silence. But here's the secret. Every time one of us speaks, their grip weakens. Afterward, a line of women waited to thank me. The last was Anna. She looked older, her tailored suit hanging loose. "Emma," she began. I walked away. Some apologies come too late. The book deal came 6 months later. The advance wasn't life-changing, but the email from my editor was, "This will change lives." I signed the contract at my kitchen table, Daniel cheering as I popped champagne. "To the next chapter," he said. Literally. Now when I pass a mirror, I don't see the woman Anna tried to destroy. I see someone who's been cracked open and put back together, stronger at the broken places. The fear hasn't vanished, but it no longer owns me. Because here's the truth about falling. It's only the end if you let it be. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more unbelievable real-life stories.